The halls of the Oregon State Capitol will be full next month for a short legislative session. Many lawmakers are breathing a sigh of relief that Measure 101 passed this week, and they won't have to come up with another way to fund Medicaid. Despite that, there are challenges ahead, including more sticky issues around paying for the state's public employee retirement system. Tonight, we preview the session with the reporters and political operatives who follow every move by state lawmakers. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Good evening and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. In even-numbered years, Oregon lawmakers convene for a short legislative session. This year's 35-day session begins February 5th against the backdrop of the governor's race later this year and following the resounding approval by voters of Measure 101. What are lawmakers' goals for the session and what can they accomplish in that short time? Tonight, a panel discussion on what we can expect. Welcome to Gordon Friedman, an Oregonian political reporter who covers the legislature. Also joining us, Rebecca Tweed, a Republican political strategist who has run dozens of successful campaigns in Oregon. She's currently gubernatorial candidate Newt Bueller's campaign manager. Also welcome KGW political analyst Len Bergstein. Thank you all for being here for Straight Talk.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Let's start with Measure 101. How big of a deal is this, Gordon, that Measure 101 passed before this legislative session?
It's a big deal. The measure was pretty much always expected to pass. I don't think people expected it would pass by quite the margin that it did, but it's a big deal that it passed because now legislators, instead of having to try and patch a Medicaid budget hole, can focus on more policy-oriented bills, which is what we're seeing because the bills were introduced last week, and there's a lot of policy that lawmakers want to get to.
It passed by almost a 62% margin. Governor Brown was pretty excited about that. Let's listen to what Governor Brown had to say on Tuesday night, right after the results were made public.
While Washington, D.C. is falling apart, Oregonians are coming together. Measure 101 shows that people from all walks of life can come together and tackle big challenges. And by putting aside our differences and putting Oregonians first, you showed the nation that we can GSD. Get stuff done.
Rebecca, 8 Oregon counties that voted for Donald Trump voted for Measure 101 and helped it pass. What does that say to you?
I think Measure 101 overall and the results shows that Oregonians really support health care. I mean, we want access to health care, and I think voters across the state understand that we have to get there somehow. But Measure 101's passage doesn't change the fact that there are significant issues with Medicaid funding in Oregon and that we can't have a patchwork solution to getting those things done. The millions of dollars of overpayments and misallocation of funds that have happened through the Oregon Health Authority, those are all things that still need to be addressed.
And will Republicans this session, do you think, talk about that and look for a long-term fix?
I think they have to, and I hope that Democrats and Republicans come together to find that. And I think the vote shows that Oregonians really want that too. We want access to health care, but we also want real solutions for it. And some of those solutions have been put forward, as Gordon said, in some of the policy fixes, but we can't have a patchwork system every 2 years to provide health care for Oregonians who need it.
Len, what are the implications for the fall elections?
Well, it clearly was a proxy fight for a whole bunch of different interest groups that got together in supporting this. It also was a cautionary note if you were a legislator who was against 101. I think you've got a hill to climb coming into this next election. Likewise, for the president, for the governor who supported it, it was a positive win for her and a little bit of momentum building. So, but most of all, I think what it demonstrated was that there's a lot of groups that really are ready to kind of battle over some of these issues. And even though it's not going to be part of the legislative battleground, I think it clearly is going to be a part of the election battleground starting, as the session starts.
You mentioned the lawmakers who opposed it, and the leading lawmaker was Republican Representative Julie Parrish. Gordon, you tweeted this week about how House Democrats are targeting her in this election for leading the way against 101. Can you tell us about that?
Right. The House Democratic fundraising committee, it's called Future PAC, sent out a fundraising email the day after the election calling out Julie Parrish by name, saying that she was an extreme politician and seeking donations to the PAC so it could fund someone to run against her, and House Democrats, they'd like to unseat Julie Parrish. She's turned herself into one of the most influential Republicans in the legislature and has been a thorn in the side of the House Democrats, which control the House.
What does this mean for the Republican Party? Rebecca?
Well, I think it's an election cycle, right? And Democrats are going to go after Republicans, and Republicans are going to go after Democrats. And when there's a hot button issue like something of Measure 101's caliber, that's going to be the first stop. I think it's a continued conversation, and I think we should expect a lot of battles at the ballot this year.
Senate President Peter Courtney issued a statement after 101's passage, and here's what he said. Passage of Measure 101 ensures we'll have the funding we need to provide basic health care for our people. It may be a win, but we aren't out of the woods yet. Our budget focus must now shift to the February forecast and the effects federal tax changes will have on state revenue. The upcoming session is short. It moves fast. We have a lot of work to do. He mentions those federal tax policy changes, and the Republicans passed that through Congress. How is that going to affect Oregon's revenue picture? And will lawmakers be focused on that, Len?
Very much so, and the committees are already trying to not only focus on it, but figure out what the heck happened. A lot of the taxes were kind of like written on the back of an envelope before they were passed by Congress, and so we kind of are still learning what that's all about. Most of the staff people are telling the leaders of the revenue committees of both houses that they have to look at the revenue impact, not only the positive impact on some taxpayers, but the negative impact. Something like a esoteric thing called pass-through taxing could have about $185 million negative impact on Oregon. So smart people like Mark Haas and Barbara Smith Warner and others who are going to be guiding those committees are trying to figure out how can they equalize that and make sure that Oregon doesn't lose a lot of money. And also, if there's some money to be gotten, like if somebody's getting money because they're repatriating their money from overseas, and that's an advantage for them on the federal taxes, then in fact the Oregon legislature maybe takes some of that, maybe sets it aside for balancing PERS or kind of equalizing taxes. So there are a lot of ways in which it's going to play itself out, but I don't think anybody knows yet because they really haven't completely figured out what the heck they did back in D.C. and what the impact of connecting or disconnecting from the federal tax code is going to be for Oregon.
Len talks about equalizing taxes. Do you see a tax fight coming, Gordon?
Potentially. There's no bill that's been introduced that would bring that up. However, one of the governor's priorities, she said a couple of weeks ago, is that she'd like to find a way to take excess revenue and put it towards PERS, as Len said, to balance out the deficit, the PERS deficit. Probably not in the February session, since it's a short session. I don't think we would see a big tax battle then, but it's possible for 2019. It's possible that someone could try and get something on the ballot, but there's nothing evident right now.
Let's take a look at the governor's priorities for this short session. She has put job creation and affordable housing in rural Oregon as one of her priorities, reducing, you mentioned this, Gordon, the PERS unfunded actuarial liability, having that set aside a fund, preventing gun violence, tackling the opioid epidemic, using taxpayer dollars wisely by containing procurement costs. Rebecca, are any of these agenda items for her priorities something that Republicans could support?
I think Republicans want to see leadership in the state that actually takes action. They want to see a PERS liability that actually comes down. They want to know that their investments that they're making with tax increases that have been supported over the years go towards targeted investments like education, like making sure that retirement is actually there for the folks that have earned it over time. I think a lot of the issues that Oregon needs leadership on right now aren't partisan issues. So whether they are things that Republicans or Democrats support, I think Oregonians are hoping to fill a vacuum of leadership to really fix the big problems in our state.
Len, how much do you think the election and Newt Bueller's priorities and Governor Brown's priorities, and Newt Bueller is the front runner in the Republican Party, how much do you think they're going to bump up against each other in this session?
Well, I think everybody's going to be watching everybody pretty closely, and I think if something's got either the governor's brand on it or Newt Bueller's brand on it, it's going to have a tougher time getting through because nobody wants to hand either one of them an easy win. So I think there'll be a lot of that juggling. You know, your viewers should know there's 240 plus bills that have come in. So some of the governor's priorities, some of Newt's priorities are going to have to kind of like compete with a lot of other things, as Gordon was saying. So it'll be, there's no question that the governor's race will shape the way the legislature wants. Equally important, quite frankly, is something we haven't talked about, and that is the question about some legislators think that the mission of a short session is to be very compact and not to do a lot of things. It really was set in motion to only fix the things that are like a budget fix or something like that. And while others think, no, there's a problem that's sitting in front of us, we ought to take a whack at kind of like fixing it. So the kind of the ideology or the mentality that some legislators have will play also a significant factor. And then on March 6th, everybody kind of like has to register and show who's running for what office. So that's the day in which everybody's finally got to say, I'm running for office or not. And that'll be probably the next kickoff of the election season, right, for you? Yeah?
Sure. Well, and I just want to add, I think one big element that's missing from the governor's priorities is really accountability for the hundreds of millions of dollars of missed payments that we learned about through the Oregon Health Authority last fall. The reports came out that over $74 million had been misallocated and overpaid to different health providers in the state. And, Representative Newt Buehler called for an independent investigation immediately, and he called for that money to be returned, and he's introduced legislation for that, really asking for accountability. That's been a big deal, and I think Oregonians care about it. I think Measure 101 heightens that folks are paying attention to where healthcare dollars are going. I don't see that as a priority for the governor, and I think that's a mistake.
Gordon, what's your take on that? What do you think we're going to see?
Well, I think Representative Buehler has actually put himself in a pretty good spot with the bills that he's introduced. One of them would keep elected officials from going onto the PERS system in the future. Another would make the health authority be more accountable for its overspending. And he's sort of in a win-win, because if the legislature takes up his ideas, he gets to take credit for, saying that we're going to rein in government waste. If they don't, he can go out on the campaign trail and say the Democrat-controlled legislature didn't want to take up these bills, which would control spending.
And if I was Newt Buehler, I'd want to say anything but Donald Trump. So he's going to try and kind of have a lot of other issues that he's going to be talking about, I would imagine, as his campaign manager. He's probably not going to say, that Donald Trump priority is the one I'm really kind of like pushing.
And that's really because he is focused on making sure that Oregon is the priority for voters, and making sure that Oregon's issues and leadership that Oregon's lacking right now is where the focus really needs to be. And I think these Medicaid overpayments and the governor not calling for the independent investigation until after he had done that, and still no plan for how that will work, shows that Oregon and Oregonians are really a top priority.
Do you think Donald Trump is a liability for Newt Buehler? And there is another candidate, a Republican, who is Sam Carpenter, I think, who is a supporter of Donald Trump. How much is that going to play into the Republican primary?
Well, here's what I know about Newt after working with him for over a year. He has blind loyalty to nobody except his wife. And that is really his commitment to his first step in what he'll do for Oregon and then to Oregonians. I think politics right now are a little bit challenging for everybody, but he'll be true to himself and true to the people of Oregon, and that's really his focus. Instead of nationalizing this campaign or focus on what's happening outside of Oregon, we have really big problems that need to be addressed, and for too long they've been ignored or they've been made worse. And
one of the
that's
things
what
that legislators are going to probably take up this session, Gordon, you can talk about this, one of the biggest issues is reducing Oregon's carbon emissions. Wasn't on the governor's priority list, but expected to be an issue. The House and Senate have a proposal that sets a cap on total greenhouse gas emissions of about 100 of Oregon's largest polluters by 2021. Those polluters would have to buy allowances to cover their emissions each year. Opponents are calling it an energy sales tax, and already the Oregon Farm Bureau, the Northwest Food Processors Association have come out against this. Gordon, what's the road ahead for this bill?
Well, it's going to be a heavy lift for the legislature to get this done in the session. It's a very complicated policy, and there's only a couple weeks for them to get it done if they want to really go after it. The bill also, it's complex, and there's a couple of industries that are actually exempt from the bill. My understanding is, at least in the Senate side proposal, agriculture is exempt from the bill. My sources tell me there's an exemption in the bill specifically written for Intel, so they wouldn't have to pay this tax. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it. You have sort of the green coalitions pushing for this, Renew Oregon, the Oregon Environmental Council, and then on the other side you have energy providers like Oregon's natural gas companies and its large manufacturers that don't want to have this policy passed this year. I think we'll probably have hearings where people come in and testify to the legislature about what the bill would do or why it's a good or bad idea. I'm not sure that it can actually get over the finish line.
You know, I think Gordon's got that one right. There's a lot of smart people working on this and have been for a long time. A lot of separate subcommittees that have been working on this to try and get it. The policy, I guess I differ a little bit. I don't think the policy is a big problem. It's the $400,000 price tag that it looks like it comes with it. So if it was revenue neutral, there might be a better chance that even in a short session you could get something through. But the fact that it comes right now until the legislature takes a whack at it with a $400,000 price tag gives a lot of people some pause going into an election year.
Well, in a time when we've had more revenue than ever still, to have a tax like this energy tax has been proposed that really will be paid by consumers. This will be something that, impacts consumers in rural and low-income Oregonians, and that's not, you can't do that in a 35-day session. It's irresponsible and it's bad policy.
But Oregonians want a carbon. They want to reduce carbon in the future, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
And the blue wall of Washington, Oregon, and California want to see this happen.
Yeah.
And so my guess is, and I don't know whether I'm off base on this panel, but my guess is that we're moving towards the policy, as Gordon
Maybe
said.
not this session.
I don't know how much
It's
of it
tough
will
to
get done.
say. I mean, in the last short session, 2016, the legislature passed this novel three-tiered minimum wage
Right.
system. That was a pretty complicated policy, and legislators spent a lot of time debating it and got it done kind of as the bell was tolling to end the session. So anything can happen. It depends on the politics, and it depends on how these hearings go.
Stay tuned. Pretty exciting. Well, another big issue that we've heard both nationally and here in Oregon are charges of sexual harassment in the Oregon legislature. We're going to talk about that right after the break. We're back in 2 minutes.